Hey guys, Captain CA here for FlatsClass YouTube. I got something a little bit different today. In fact, we're going to learn a little thing about slow pitch jigging offshore. I know, not my wheelhouse, honestly, so I'm not going to be the guy talking about it. I recently participated at Sodium Fishing here in Crystal River in the Shimano Pro Day, where we had longtime bass professional Bernie Schultz there, and Benny Ortiz, who is the quintessential expert on slow pitch jigging offshore for all kinds of fish. I mean, billfish, groupers and snappers, you name it. Any pelagic that you can imagine that's on the list, he's probably caught on these jigs. So this is something that's been around for a while. You know, we all did the butterfly jigs back in the day. Even I did that for redfish on bridges and stuff that crossed Tampa Bay up in the Panhandle and stuff when I was a competitive angler. Very effective technique. In a micro sense, I could see this working for my audience as well, fishing shipping channels or fishing some of those deeper passes on a smaller scale with maybe micro jigs. But if you really want to learn the nuances and see how lightweight this tackle is, and it's specialty tackle, it's only going to be utilized for this. You've got to watch these excerpts of Benny's seminar. Benny Ortiz, you can look him up online and you're going to find in-depth pieces on this particular slow pitch jigging technique for offshore. But I thought it'd be cool to put a couple of them in this. And we've got some footage from the water that my son shot because they went out the next day. The rep, Brian Dufek, both John and Casey from Sodium Fishing and a couple of the other pros, they went offshore and they just crushed it. They went out to 900 feet of water and it was just an amazing day of fishing. I'm sure you'll see all the pictures, but here's Benny here, and I'm gonna turn it over to him and let you watch what's next. This episode of FlatsClass YouTube is brought to you by Aquatraction, your go-to solution for advanced marine flooring.
Benny's got him. There you go. Easy, Benny. There you go. Survive that run. Show him for Benny.
Floating up. Big old guy. Whoop. Back here, man. Look. Big king. Got him. I knew he was going to do that. Nice kingfish on the jig there.
There we go. Got him right in the right
surprise
spot.
bonus, huh?
Kingfish routinely hit jigs. A lot of times, though, you don't get quite that good hook sit like you have there, right in the corner. That got real lucky. Otherwise, he would have cut right through that assist cord. So. All right, so if you check it out, even though that hook was right there in the corner of his mouth, his teeth still got into that Kevlar assist cord. So you can see right there, it was pretty close to going all the way through. And then if you look up the leader a little bit, you see it's actually pretty good on this one. A little couple nicks here, but surprisingly landed that real toothy critter. Today we're going to be talking about slow pitch jigging. So some of you may not have any experience with it at all. Some of you might have a lot of experience. I don't know where that lies. I think we're kind of on the not so much experience side. But we're going to go ahead and talk about everything that you need to know from the fundamentals of slow pitch jigging, from the tackle, technique, how do you hook up with a fish, land a fish, all that good stuff. We'll talk about the jigs, talk a little bit about me, and we'll go through everything so that you guys have a good foundation for starting a very alien technique to a lot of folks. So first, I'm Ortiz, Shimano Pro, and I specialize in slow pitch jigging. So it's basically all that I do. I almost never, actually I can't say almost, I never bring bait on trips with me anymore. I only fish these jigs anywhere that I go, and I have found that it is as productive or more productive than fishing on bait, even live bait when you're out there. We'll go through a little bit of the history of it first. So this technique started in Japan probably about 15-20 years ago. It was started by a guy named Naruhito Sato. And only the way that the Japanese can kind of overthink things, they were thinking about ways to fish in their highly pressurized fishery. So over there, they don't have the regulations that we do. They also have a lot deeper water than we do. They fish for different types of fish. They don't fish over a lot of structure like we do here. So they really refined this tackle, and they overthought the entire thing to be an entire system, really to work together. So they took existing stuff and they modified it. And what they did was they went down as far, and I mentioned this actually yesterday's seminar as well, even so far as, do we need hooks to start this? Like, that's the fundamental level that they went down to. Obviously the answer is yes, but then it became very specialized for those hooks as they went on. So as the technique developed in Japan, there were some companies that were on the forefront of the whole jigging movement. For instance, Shimano, you guys probably have all heard of the butterfly jigging system, right? And that's, a lot of people got into the butterfly jigging system back when that came out. I know I did. That was my intro to jigging here. So I had my Trevally rod, I had my Torium reel, and I went out and I got a couple of jigs that were, in ounces that I found, because I didn't know what grams were at the time. Really, I couldn't make the conversions like a lot of folks. But over time, you kind of learn that metric system. Slow pitch rods, a pure slow pitch rod is usually between 6'3" and about 6'8". So this one's kind of in that sweet spot in the middle. And there's a couple of characteristics, and I'll run from the back of it to the front of it to kind of explain all the whys behind this, why it's set up like this, and why it looks kind of ridiculous for people who haven't fished slow pitch jigs before. So the entire slow pitch jigging system is really what they call a listening game. Okay, you're listening, and we're not really listening, but observing the conditions of your day. So you're matching your jigs, you're matching your line, everything to the conditions of the day, right? So this rod here is a medium. So this one's rated for jigs up to about 330 grams, so about 10 ounces, give or take, right? And that's on the low end for what we fish. We fish usually jigs, let's say 200 to start. Up here you can get away with a little bit less because you have a little bit less current. But this is kind of my go-to as my jack of all trades rod. So starting here at the butt end, you notice it has this kind of bulbous knob here at the end. I'll go into the technique in a little bit, but when you pitch the jig from here, you slide this under your arm once you hook up, and the reason why that is there is because you're using that as the kind of stopping point for you when you're actually fighting the fish. All right, I'll talk to you about that in a little bit with the technique. Now you have this exposed blank here. So everything about this rod is about sensitivity. You want to be able to feel what that jig is doing in the water. You want to be able to feel that strike when it happens. Sometimes that strike is violent. Sometimes the strike is actually pretty subtle. But you want to be able to feel that. And this rod just has that sensitivity that really just travels through everything. You're using braided line, so you can feel everything in the water from when that jig hits the bottom to when a fish actually hits it. Moving up from there, we've got a conventional reel seat, and you can see there's a couple key differences with this reel seat as opposed to a traditional rod. So it's very short, right? No foregrip on it. There's no foregrip on it because when you fight a fish, you're not fighting on a lift and pump, right? Like you've always done before. You're actually fishing more in a straight line. Usually you're pointing the rod at the fish and you're using the reel as the tool to fight the fish. The rod is just a tool to impart an action on the jig. So you can put a little bit of pressure on this thing, not actually a decent amount, but you're not using this to fight the fish. So conventional reel seat on there. Conventional is very important. When we go through the reel, we'll talk about why conventional is important as opposed to spinning. But as you go up on here, you guys can kind of see, get in the camera right there, these are all micro guides. Right? These are kind of like bass rod guides on there. So in order to get through these guides, you need to have a very slim line-to-line connection. We'll talk about the special knots that we tie for a line-to-line connection in a little bit. But the reason why is you're so close to the blank. You want to keep that line really close to the blank. That way it's as sensitive as possible. Again, the listening game. You're always taking in that feedback that's out there. The more, the closer you are to the blank, the better sensitivity that you have. Shimano actually has 3 versions of their jigging reels. They've got a 1500, 2000, and a 4000. I have a 4000 over here. I'll show you for a comparison. So you can see this is a pretty beefy reel. Absolute beast in terms of drag output and capacity. This one holds about 1,350 yards of 20-pound Power Pro. And, you hear 20-pound Power Pro, it's like, wait, how are you going to catch grouper or whatever on 20-pound line? We'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's essentially double the reel that this one is. Okay, so you can see the differences in the spool. Everything is about doubled on there. Why do we use a conventional reel? So with slow pitch jigging, again, want to keep vertical in the water, right? Again, this rod is designed to impart an action on the jig, not to fight the fish, right? So if I am fighting a fish with spinning gear, anybody, how do you gain line on spinning gear? Lift and pump, right? Lift and pump. Can't lift and pump with this. So right there, spinning reels are essentially out, okay? The other reason is actually because you want to be able to manipulate this reel to control the fall of the jig. So on the initial descent of the jig when you're dropping down, what you want to do is you want to keep a little bit of pressure on the spool, either with your index finger or your thumb here. And the reason why is because that gentle pressure keeps that jig in a vertical position, okay? So it rockets down faster. If you take pressure off the spool, then the jig starts to do what it's doing in the water. You start scoping out your current, and you're not in that ideal position when you get down. All right, so that's why you have the conventional reel. The third reason why is because you're fighting the fish off of the reel. Everything is going to come off of this. So think of this as a winch. All right, you're not using that pump and wind. You're using point and crank on that fish. So as the fish is coming up, slowly bringing it up. Right. A couple of the technical aspects of the reel, what are important. All of these reels have fairly high retrieval rates. So whether you have a power gear version, which has a 5-to-1 ratio in the 2000, or in the power gear on this is a 4.4-to-1. So you have a lot of torque in those. So these are better for like grouper fishing, things like that. You also have the higher gear version, which is a 6-to-1. That retrieves about 46 inches per crank. The power gear is about 38 inches per crank. So you want to have that fast line retrieve because, again, staying vertical in the water, when that jig hits the bottom, you're going to have a little bit of belly in your line. So by having that high retrieve, you get that slack out quick, and you have that vertical presentation that you want to have, okay? Handle on these reels are a little bit extended from a typical reel that you're going to have. Reason why? Using it as a winch, extra length on the handle gives you more torque to make better, more powerful handle turns. So everything about this reel is completely specialized for jigging. All right, whether you're going to do speed jigging, slow pitch jigging, everything about this reel is specifically designed for jigging. You also notice big old T handle on here, really ergonomic. Fingers are cut out on there. You got a really secure grip on it, and it's really helpful actually for pitching. It's a very comfortable reel that you can fish all day long. Up here, I use this for super deep water. So when I say super deep, I have a little bit, I was talking to some folks before, and they're talking about deep fishing out here, and they're like 200 feet deep, Where I'm fishing 8, 9, 1,100 feet of water on the bottom, right? So let's talk about that thin diameter line and why it's important. So if you're fishing 1,000 feet of water, right? And you've got 20-pound braid that's going down there. If you took all that line and you wove it into a little square, it would be like a little sail in the water, right? Imagine putting that thing in the water and see where it would go. And the current would really influence all that. It's the same exact concept because you still have that same surface area over the entire length of line that you're out there. So by scaling down your line and still benefiting from that increased braking strength of it, you can stay vertical in the water a lot better without having to worry about your line breaking off. For instance, if you're using 50-pound versus 20-pound, you're going to have double the surface area, and that sail's going to get even bigger. Right? So the higher you go in terms of your line, the more water influence you're going to have on it, and you're going to get scoped out quite a bit more. So you want to scale down as much as you can. Some folks are even going less. They're going down to like 10-pound line. I don't know if you get too much of a benefit from the 20 out of the 10, but that's usually what I use in my setups. So I usually tie to a fluoro leader. This one's a 50-pound leader on here. 50-pound is usually pretty sufficient. But I mentioned before that line-to-line connection. So let's put against the black of my shirt. Can you see this connection here, guys? Yeah. Right there? That's called a PR knot. All right, so there's 2 knots that you can tie that are really slim. You know, you want to have a literally slim line-to-line connection so it passes through these guides, doesn't bang around there, doesn't damage your guides. But this line connection, if you tie it correctly, is 100% line-to-line. So that's an FG knot, which is the hand-tied version of this. That's about like 80% on its best day. So this is going to be the best possible knot that you can use for a line-to-line connection to your fluorocarbon leader. Now, I like fluoro over mono because fluoro is a little bit more abrasion resistant, and I think that the hardness of the fluoro actually helps with that line, because when you're tying one of these knots, have you ever seen a PR knot get tied yet? Well, he has, but all right, so a PR knot is tied with a PR bobbin, and give me 1 second, I'll grab the bobbin out of my bag. If you've ever seen fly fishing, you've probably seen a bobbin like this before.
Hopefully you're learning something here. And his ability to catch even kingfish in this scenario. I mean, you saw that kingfish. It's amazing what can happen using this technique, especially them fishing frontiers that are so far offshore that not many of us have the means to get out there and do it. But he assures me that this can be done in pressured water as well, and really trip the trigger of many of the bottom dwellers and pelagic fish. So hopefully you're a fan of this. Now I'm going to send you back to the action and the seminar here, and I'll be back to finish up in a little bit.
Just a simple Palomar knot over this here solid ring. I like to use a ball bearing swivel. Okay, the reason why I like to use a ball bearing swivel is because when I fish for larger fish, particularly grouper, a lot of times their mouths are open on the way up, so they spin. By having this on here, this spins independently and I don't get line twist on the way up. So I don't have to worry about any wonkiness happening with my reel. It also gives me about another inch or so of metal up here, just in case something toothy is around that hits. I mean, if you have a barracuda or kingfish or wahoo, they're scissors. They're gonna go right through this. You know, cost of doing business, unfortunately. But if they hit here, you know, you do have a little bit extra for your toothy critters. This is off of the split ring. I have off of the solid ring here on the lower end of this swivel, I have a split ring. And for my split ring, I attach my hooks, okay? So this is kind of what your jig is gonna look like when you have it set up here. So I have 2 hooks on the top, 2 hooks on the bottom. I'll generally fish this style of setup with 4 hooks on there for, you know, anything under 400 feet. Once I get deeper, I'll switch over to a 2-hook setup, singles on the top and bottom. Okay, so this is a Shimano Shimmer Fall, this is a 210 gram, this is a Shimano Wing Fall, 250 gram. 2 different jigs, same colorways, 2 different setups on them. But you're gonna notice that these jigs are, one's short and fat, one's long and slender. We'll talk about the jigs in a minute and what they do in the water. But I want to talk about why we have 2 sets of hooks on your jig. How do fish strike? Mostly from the head first, right? That's where they're going to be engulfing their fish. When this jig is in the water, the fish doesn't realize it's a jig. It thinks it's a fish. The fish swim directionally, always head first. But sometimes this jig is going this way in the water. Sometimes the jig is going that way in the water, right? Or sometimes the fish might be trailing from the bottom if you start reeling up. So by having the 2 hooks on both sides, if the jig is going this way, strikes from this side. Jig is going this way, strikes from this side. It's going to get those hooks in its mouth first, shake, and then these hooks are usually going to sink into the fish as well. So you're going to have a really secure hook set on there. Also, why do we have 4 hooks on there, these little tiny guys? These are 3-aughs on there. You want to be able to have multiple hooks on there so that way no one hook is bearing the full brunt of the fish, okay? Most of the time these are not going to bend out, but you want to have as much of a secure connection as you possibly can. So that's why we have the 2 hooks on there. And when I start fishing, I usually change out jigs a lot in the beginning, like a crazy person. You know, I'll have every drop, I'll try something new, until I get it to where I want it to be, or I start getting strikes that are on there. So you really want to have a good selection at first when you're out there. That way you'll be able to match the conditions of your day and really take in the information that the environment's giving you to give a proper presentation to the fish. That being said, the fish don't care what the jig is, okay? I've caught fish this big on jigs this big. I've caught fish this big on jigs this big, right? It doesn't matter. It's a reaction strike. These fish are predators. They're going after an easy meal. That's what they think it is. It's a fluttering thing. Oh, it's a wounded fish, let me go get it. Every meal that they've had their entire life has been a bait fish, right? Or something else that's down there. But it's never been a jig. And for the first time they get this jig in their face, I mean, it's gotta be a hell of a surprise. But, you know, those fish are just trying to get that easy meal. And it doesn't matter exactly what the jig is. It just you need to match it with the conditions of the day. So what colors do I like to use? In terms of colors, what I find is that if a jig reflects UV light, it's going to be more successful than if it doesn't reflect UV light. It doesn't necessarily mean that it glows, but I think this is really important, particularly for the deeper water stuff where the fish are living in darkness. They still have eyes, they're still taking in things from their environment, and they have to have eyes for a reason. Now what we see at the surface here, you know, everybody's heard of Roy G. Biv, right? The visible light spectrum. Well, everyone probably in this room also knows, as you go down in the water column, light starts to disappear, and its visible color spectrum starts to go. So your reds start going first, and then all the way down, last one being violet. But what's more than violet? Ultraviolet, right? And that penetrates deeper in the water column. And that's why I think that having a jig that reflects that UV light, so if you have you can get a black light flashlight off Amazon for like 10 bucks, flash it on there, see if it reflects UV light, and I bet you that's gonna be a higher producer than a jig that doesn't do that. The only jigs that I've seen that really are really good high producers are also ones with good contrast on them. So if you look at this version of the Shimmerfall, this is the sand eel pattern, and this is a really good producer for me. Really dark on top, light on the bottom, just like a lot of bait fish are. Having that contrast in the silhouette in the water, I think also benefits you for your jig selection. Okay. This is a big lever, okay? And this is gonna be your fulcrum point. So by having either the butt end of the jig, or the rod under your forearm, you're able to basically use this point as your leverage point. Just think, you know, up on the surface, obviously I have nothing on here, but if I'm 240 feet down, I've got a 250 gram jig on there, this rod's gonna load up pretty good, right? It's gonna have that even recoil that I wanna have in the rod. So by having it under my arm, I can really manipulate that jig, you know, slow technical movements, big long fall movements. A lot of times you guys have probably seen people speed jigging with that rod under your arm here, because they're just, you know, doing one of these, right? Look at the difference in the range of motion that I have from here versus here, right? Now I can go for really big long movements if I want to get something that really sweeps up and flutters down a lot, or I can go like little short movements and punch that jig out to the side. But everything here is connected under your forearm. Now, this changes dramatically once you hook up with the fish. The second you feel that bite, that rod goes under your arm here. So it slides off under here, and now you have that little butt end that sticks into your arm, okay? Once you hook up with that fish, the first thing that you should do, most people want to set the hook, you know, Bill dance it, and they want to get that hook set on there. The first thing you should do though, get the slack out of the line first. Reel, then set. Because if there's any belly in that line as it's going down, you want to get that out so you have a direct connection to the fish and then set that hook, okay? Once you do have that fish hooked up, this tip of this rod is really not that beefy. So you don't want to have too much pressure on there. It's not lifting and pumping, and I see videos of people doing this. I see that all that weight put on the rod tip. Even with all the cool construction of this, with the high power X, Spiral X, everything about it is super good, it can't take all the weight on the tip. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna slide from here under your arm, and you're pointing and cranking on that fish, okay? So usually the way it'll go for me is I'll hook up, I'll keep it here, and that rod will be kind of doubled over, and I'll use the butt end of the rod as you know, all the strength that it has, and try to keep that fish up. And once I get that initial couple cranks on the fish, then I'm down and I'm pointing. Slow and even cranking on the fish. As it comes up, this rod will act as a shock absorber. So once the fish, sometimes they'll buck their heads, and you just kind of nice and easy, not in a rush, just get that fish up, even cranking on the fish, okay? Once that fish comes to the boat and it's on the surface, you know, a lot of times, especially over here, this is, you know, something that I'm fortunate in Southeast Florida, where a lot of the captains have seen slow pitch jigging, but up here, folks that haven't seen it, a couple things the captains will do. And I need you to be really aware of this if you guys do go down this road. Sometimes they'll go leader the fish, they'll grab it and just naturally make that loop on their hand. When they do that, that puts a lot of pressure on the tip, and sometimes these things break when the captains do that. Or alternatively, they'll gaff the fish, it comes in the boat, and for some reason you're at some weird angle because the fish came in a weird angle, and there's all this tension on the line, and boop, tip will pop off, right? And then you'll have the warranty claim for people saying that, you know, I was just fishing, but really we all know what happened. What I like to do once that fish hits the surface is put it in free spool, okay? Most of the fish when they come to the surface, other than like tuna or things like that, aren't gonna be moving around a whole hell of a lot. So by keeping it in free spool and keeping my thumb on the spool for the tension that I need, I can let the line go out as the captain is grabbing it without having to worry about something happening to the tip of my rod, okay? For any of your questions on jigging or this stuff or any kind of questions at all.
What's the approximate cost of the lighter setup?
Okay, so the approximate cost of this is going to be about $549 for this particular reel. This rod is about $420, so you're looking at about $1,000 all in. A lot of money, but you can also scale down in terms of price. So for that, I have a grappler. So this is a Shimano grappler type slow J. This is $289. If folks are budget conscious, they can go for something like a Torium 14 or a Torium 16 that's on there. That'll get you in the game for about $500 all in, and you're gonna have a very capable setup at that. And you're gonna have very similar performance in terms of the rod. Guides are gonna be a little bit scaled down from like the game series, but they're still very good guides. And you still have the same high power X, spiral X that's in there. So you have all the performance features that are in here and a little bit more economical price point.
Well, hopefully you're learning something. While you've been listening to Benny, I've been working on new lure color designs for Mirrolure because we're going to have a bunch of new products come out this fall. Bottom line is we're trying to really provide everything for you guys, whether it's some bass fishing techniques, some offshore fishing techniques, and naturally you get plenty of inshore stuff from me. But I thought Mr. Benny Ortiz would be a very valued video for us to put out there. And for those of you that have the ability to do that style of fishing, I'm sure you enjoyed it. And you probably know who Benny is, but for those of you that don't, you know who he is now. And he is one of our premier pros at Shimano. And someone we may actually have on FlatsClass one day. You'll never know. We're at least going to do a podcast with him. I promise you that for sure. If you like what you see here on FlatsClass YouTube, hit that subscribe button. I want you to punch that button. I want you to tell your friends all about us because we want to make you a better angler. Until next time, Captain C.A. Richardson signing off. I got to get back to coming up with a couple of little new doohickeys here.